JamesPoeartistry.Online.
Hi, perceptive readers. I saw a report on Star Wars Mag, and it was bringing out what George Lucas has stated at a recent event. Uh, she went on to relate that he received a standing ovation, and people were very happy to have him there. Now, I'm not going to go back through is that Star Wars Mag or what was talked about. But there was a couple of points that George Lucas talked about that I wanted to also uh, interject a thought of mine on those. These are not thoughts that just came up today. I've actually had them for some time in my creative musings. See, keep that in mind. My creative musings, where you can think about a whole bunch of stuff for inspiration and what you're going to do. So keep that in mind. Now, they mentioned in this report that George Lucas actually did commend them for the special effects, the technology that they used and the way that they used it, etc. And then he expressed himself on what he didn't care too much for. And the gist of what he was saying is he felt the producers of the shows after his 1 through 6, which he now has total control over. You see, he didn't give those up. Those are his original storylines. He wants them to stay the same. He doesn't even want to put them into any other digital format. You see what I'm saying? Of changing. There was an example about the laser disc and how the people felt about that years ago, what have you. The whole point is he wants to keep everything to the historical formula of remembrance and even the look along with the storyline. And so, speaking of storylines, he feels, as I told you, that the producers or the writers afterwards maybe took some of his ideas, but then they totally went off on their own stories. You see, and he did. He feels that they did maybe lose the concept of the thoughts of what Star Wars was in the first place, even with the force, even along with the audience of not being so grown up, but actually was so that children could enjoy the movie. And he said it was taken away. Another thing that he realizes is that yes, after he sold the rights or whatever he did afterwards, but kept 1 through 6 to himself. Um, that they can't make changes to the canon or what have you of it. Uh, he realizes, he said, well, it's not them, but this is what the reporter was saying, so maybe they got it from him directly, that once he gave it up, he gave it up. And so, that's that. Now, I'm going to talk about that. Once he gave it up, he gave it up. The other thing that I want to talk about is the concept. See, in his creative musings, and this is something that a lot of persons didn't find out until really uh, within the past decade. Really, a lot of persons didn't know about this. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about the Force and even the midichlorians that they talk about. The life force of what people are born with these. Some people call them aliens, amoebas, or what have you. And that's how they was able to find out that Anakin would be strong in the Force. You see, a lot of persons were saying, where in the world did this come from? And then in interviews, George Lucas actually did say that, he thought of that way back in the beginning, even in the 70s. Now, it wasn't addressed at all in the first 6 movies. So what am I about to say about this? Well, just as a fan, Really? See, you can have a lot of ideas and even a lot of creative musings. And sometimes you'll go back through, like, I mentioned about Gene Roddenberry. And Gene Roddenberry, boy, I tell you what, you can find out a lot of his creative musings turned out to be great when people picked them up. Now, there, of course, some creative musings that weren't good to come back to. Not yet, still, even during this time. So, what am I saying? What I'm saying is that even for George Lucas, that idea of the midichlorians, it took decades or so for them to elaborate on. And you know what I'm going to say? They could have waited a few more decades to elaborate on it, if not ever. You know, the concept of the way that he did the Force, even way back in the 70s, it just sits right with me. It truly does. The midichlorians idea, I just didn't feel was not necessary whatsoever, you see. And some of the concepts that the people came up with is that what we wanted to show was that, you know, anybody could use the Force or have the Force or what have you. And then I think they even got so that you could work out with the midichlorians, whether you got thousands of them or you got a few of them or whatever. But see, my whole takeaway from the first 6 episodes in the first place was it was still really a training of the discipline of the mind and the spirit. Nothing to do with anything else that was internally, you see, and it just sit right with me, or externally, physically, or what have you. So that's one of the things I want to mention. The other thing that I want to mention, see, this is what I'm telling you, where sometimes people will use an example, and this is not this is apples and oranges here. What I'm doing is I'm using one situation to still give you an example of how has been used at times to almost like try to put somebody in a certain frame of mind. But I'm still saying that, know what, this still isn't the same concept. This is still not the same situation. Okay. So what am I talking about? well, he used the expression that if you give it up, you give it up. Now, that's why he won't really go back through and fight with all the episodes that came out afterwards or what have you. But see, this is what I really want to emphasize. Before George Lucas gave anything up, what did he do? How many lawyers were involved? How many hours of negotiation was involved? How much money transpired? How much clear-cut details were written out? Notes, memos, etc. See, straight up in that process, you knew what was going on. George Lucas knew what was going on with his baby, as he called them, and the people was trying to buy or adopt or purchase his baby. Okay? So once he gave up the rest of his babies or what have you, he knew it. He got paid for it, etc. Nobody was going to walk in on George Lucas. It's like imagine walking into George Lucas's office and picking up all his stories, all his intellectual property, and taking them with you, and taking it with them. Imagine somebody doing this, and then not only taking them away from George Lucas, capitalize on everything, and then really just put him in a situation where it's like, you mean to tell me without any formal contact, any formal agreements, no negotiation, no payment, no transfer services, you mean to tell me you just taking all of this now and trying to make George Lucas be gullible enough to think that all his rights and intellectual property, his writings, his stories, and stuff like that are not his, but just because somebody took liberties to just come in his office and take everything out of it. You would think somebody crazy, wouldn't you? Well, that's what I want to tell you as well. You know, sometimes people make it seem like, and I've heard this, they'll say, you had your chance. No, you didn't. Not if somebody stole your identity, you know. Not if somebody stole your intellectual property. Not if somebody took this from you. Not if somebody took that from you. And all the while, never treated you like the professional that you were supposed to be, not the writer or the author you were supposed to be to make a deal. So, what am I telling you? There are some situations where it's nice to hear a good story, but a deal was never formally made at all. A contract was never formally made at all. Now, I've told you before with people, it's one thing to try to save face or what have you. But you know what? You have really lost your rights in the sense, and or otherwise, to still try to tell a person what to do, and then even try to insult them as if they're stupid or silly, when this has nothing to do with just an everyday type of interaction. You're not going to take a major assault on a person and their intellectual property right and still, in order to try to save face, to make it seem like you weren't doing what you really were doing to that person to destroy them. You understand what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying? Same thing with creative music. See, imagine, and I could name some artists right now, the mode that they go into, the tools that they use, uh, the meals that they eat, all sorts of stuff that they do in their creativity. That's theirs. That's theirs. You see? And then, there's been some artists who would even go into rooms for 6, 7 days. Nobody would see them. And they would play instruments. They would meditate. They would draw. It's like they'll go in there thinking about making a song, but in the process of making a song, the next thing you know, sometimes they're even doing more than doodling. They're starting to think of clothing line. You see, all that is wrapped up in their creative process. So the whole thing is, if you want to get that artist, you see, or be on the same page as that artist, you don't walk up into that artist and their process and their program, whatever, and just say, you don't do this, you don't do that. When the whole point is, this was part of that artist's business before you started trying to hinder them in the first place and hijack, etc. So the point is, let me emphasize on this one. It's actually stupid and silly to try to continue to insult somebody that, in this case, for their own personal life, you should be learning from. But your own pride won't make you do what's right. JamesPoeartistry.Online